Bruchim Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Chav Ches Amud Beis, 4 lines from the top. Our Gemara previously discussed Tumas Oyhalim and said that regards to the Tumas of an oil that is attached to the ground and no longer has the status of a Kli, when it has a mace underneath it, not only does the area that is beneath the oil, metame, whatever is underneath it, people, kalim, food, but sometimes the oil itself becomes tameh. The Gemara asks, what about if that oil is made out of a behema tameya? Does it become tameh as a result of the mace that is beneath it? The Gemara tried to prove from Tumas Negoim and rejected it, tried to prove from Tumas Shrotzim and rejected it, tried to prove from a Tzad Hashava between the two of them and also rejected that. Finally, the Gemara concluded that indeed we have a Kal Vachomer from Noitza Shel Izim. The Noitza Shel Izim was indeed the second layer of the roof of the Mishkan. And the Gemara made a Kal Vachomer by the Noitza Shel Izim, which is not Mitame bin Negoim, and yet Mitame Ba'oil HaMeis. As we see from when it comes to the Mishkan, he's able to make an oil. As an or behema, which is yes mitame b'negoim, then kal v'chomer is mitame be'oil hames. Says our Gemara, ve'lohod etani Rabbi Yosef lo huchsheru b'meleches shomayim elo or behema tahara bilvad l'may hilchasa. Once Rabbi Yosef, who said that it's not huchsheru b'meleches shomayim unless it's used with a behema tahara, not a behema tameya. What was he referring to if it's no longer referring to the oil hames? After all, it can't be referring to the Mishkan. And if we prove that it can be an oil hames, but what about in regard to Meleches Shomayim? What was he referring to? Says the Gemara L'Tfilin. He's referring to that tefillin cannot be used with a behema tameya because it's Meleches Shomayim. Ask the Gemara, but tefillin behed yiksiv behu. Tefillin has an explicit pasuk. I'll read you. Says the pasuk, v'hoy lecha la'ois al yadcha u'lezikron bein einecha, referring to the tefillin. And then it says, leman tiyeh taras Hashem beficha. And so the Gemara makes a drasha, leman tiyeh taras Hashem beficha, so that the taras of Hashem will be in your mouth. Min hamuter beficha, that which is permissible to be eaten in your mouth. Obviously excluding a behema tameya. Ella says the Gemara le'aron. Rather, he was referring to that you cannot use a behema tameya for the tefillin, for the or of the tefillin, the leather, meaning the boxes that are made out of its hide. Says the Gemara, that can't be. V'amar Abayi, shin shel tefillin halach l'Moshe Sinai. We learn halach l'Moshe Sinai that the shin that is engraved on the tefillin shel rosh, which begins the name of Shakai, that is already learned, and therefore that certainly wasn't what he was referring to. Elo lekarachon b'saron u'letoifron begidon. Rather, to wrap the parchments with the hairs of the animal and to sew them with its sinews. That has to be with a kosher animal. Says that also cannot be, because hanami halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that's also learned out as halacha l'Moshe Sinai. The Tanya tefillin merubo is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Tefillin, we're taught in the Braisa that indeed halacha l'Moshe Sinai has to be squared. Nichrochois b'sa'arim v'nisparos begidon. It has to be also wrapped with the hairs and also sewed with the sinews. So that cannot refer to that. Ella l'ritzuos, maybe the ritzuos of the tefillin is what he was referring to. Says the Gemara, and we learn out that the ritzuos, the straps of the tefillin, have to be black, and therefore other halachas of ritzuos as well, including lechara, the fact that the animal has to be a behema tahara. Says the Gemara, nihi the gemiri shcharos taharos migamiri. Granted, halacha Moshe Sinai teaches me that the ritzuos have to be black, but doesn't say that it has to be with a behema tahara. And therefore the Gemara concludes that indeed this is what he was referring to when it says Lahukshu Meleches Shomayim Ella B'Mehema Tahara. Now that he has said that that's referring to tefillin, referring to specifically the ritzuos, has to be from a behema tahara. So the Gemara now goes back to its original question. The tachash animal that was used for the hides as a roof above the Mishkan, what type of animal was that? Amar of Eloi, Amar of Shimon Lakish, Omer Hayrabi Meir, tachash ahay b'mei Moshe, beria b'fnei atzma. The Gemara asked, "My have Allah the tachash ahay b'mei Moshe." What was with the tachash? What is the conclusion of this tachash animal? Is it indeed tahara or is it tameya? Omar Rabbi Eloi, Omar Rabbi Shimon Lakish, Omer Haya Rabbi Meir, Tachash Haya b'mei Moshe, Beria b'fnei atzma Haya. It was a beria. Now that the Gemara concludes that Rav Yosef was not referring to when he said Hukshu Meleches Shomayim, Lokshu Meleches Ela or Behema Tahara, he certainly was not referring to the Mishkan. To which case the Gemara comes back to then asking, what about the Tachash, which was used as a covering for the roof of the Mishkan? My have Allah the Tachash Shahai b'mei Moshe. What is the conclusion of the Tachash hides that were used as the gag of the Mishkan? Om Rabbi Eloi, Om Rabbi Shimon Lakish, Omer Haya Rabbi Meir, Tachash Shahaya b'mei Moshe, Beria b'fnei atzma Haya. It was a unique animal. V'lo hichriu bo chachamim, im min chaya hu, im min behema hu. And it wasn't concluded whether it was definitively a behema or a chaya. The keren achas hayesa loy b'mitzroy had one horn on its forehead. Ulefi shah nizdamen loy leMoshe v'osa mimeno mishkan v'nignaz. It was only came along in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu to use as the Mishkan, and afterwards it was then discontinued. It was extinct. From the fact that it says that it had one keren, one horn on its forehead, we can conclude that indeed it was an animal that was tahor. How do we know? The Omer of Yehuda. First of all, an animal that has a keren, Chazal tell us in another place that also has split hooves. And if it has split hooves, therefore that has the unique mark of a animal that is tahar, because only the pig, only the chazir has split hooves and doesn't chew its cud. So mistama, it's talking about a behema that is tahara, an animal that's tahar. Another proof, the Omer of Yehuda shor shehikriv adam harishon keren achas haisalo b'mitzchay. The shore that Adam Harishon brought as a carbon, it said had one keren on its forehead. So presumably it's the same type of animal. Shenemar v'seitav laHashem mishor par makrin mafris. And since it says over there that better is to Hashem than a shor par, than an ox that is horned and that is hoofed, so presumably we're talking about an animal that also is kosher. The same way that had a horn, so too this also has one horn, and therefore it's presumably the same type of kosher animal. Gemara asks, but here it's makrin tarti mashma. The fact that it says makrin and mafris, that it's horned and hoofed, it's mashma that horned is more than one horn, and therefore it's not the same type of proof that one horned animal is indeed tahor. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok, mikeren kesiv. Without the yud, it's written mikeren and therefore singular. Says the Gemara, "Velifshot minod the min behemahu." So let's be poished that indeed this animal is a behema, not a chaya. Kivan de ika keresh de min chayahu. Since there's an animal that was called keresh, which was a chaya, v'lesle ella chade keren, and it only had one horn, talking about a unicorn. So ika lemeimar min chayahu. They could say that indeed it is a chaya, and therefore it's not conclusive whether this animal of tachash was a behema or a chaya. The Gemara now brings a new Mishnah, psilas habeget shekipla v'lo yivhava. if a person has a psilas habeged, he takes a beged that is the size of gimel al gimel etzbos, and he then makes it into a psila. That means he folds it and makes it into a wick, shekipla, v'lo yihiv hava, and he doesn't singe that wick. Rabbi Eliezer oimer temeyahi ve'ei malikim bo. Rabbi Eliezer says that since indeed it is something that he did not singe, therefore it still remains a kli. Since it had the size of gimel al gimel etzbos, it can still be considered a kli because you can somehow easily unwrap it if it hasn't been singed, and therefore it's tmeya ve'ei malikim bo, and you cannot light it. That will be explained in the Gemara why not. Rabbi Akiva oimer tahara hiu malikim bo. Rabbi Akiva says no, since it was already wrapped, is already folded into a psil, into a wick, therefore it then loses its status as a kli, and therefore can then be considered to be tahor. It's not mekabel tuma. Umalikim bo, and you can light it. Says the Gemara, bishlama le'inyan tuma behapligi. In regards to the fact that it's mekabel tuma, that we understand that they're arguing the Rabbi Eliezer sovar kipul eino moyel uvemilse kamaise kaimo. Like we explained, that Rabbi Eliezer says that since that he then folded it into a psil, it doesn't take its status away from being a kli that can be mekabel tuma. Rabbi Akiva sovar kipo moyel ubitul botil. Whereas Rabbi Akiva holds that the fact that he did make it into a psil, into a wick, it then loses its status as a kli and therefore is not mekabel tuma. So we understand the machlokes between the two of them, whether it's tamei or tahor. Elo, in regards to the second halacha, le'in halakha b'may pligi. In regards to lighting or not lighting, what's the machlokes? Why does Rabbi Eliezer say you cannot light it, and Rabbi Akiva says you could light it? Om Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Oshaya, v'chein Om Rabbi Ado bar Ahavo, hacha b'sholosh al sholosh mitzumtzomois askinan. We're talking about exactly the size of gimel al gimel etzbos, which is the minimum shear of a beged that can mekabel tuma. Uveyantif shechalios erev Shabbos askinan. We're talking about where that yantif is erev Shabbos, and that's the lights. That's the situation that we're talking about in terms of lighting the psilos habeged. And he explains the kuli alma is lehud Rabbi Yehuda, and everybody holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva are going after his opinion. The Omar masikim bekelim masikim shivrei kelim, that you can light, you can ignite and set a fire to that which is a kli, that is wood, but not that which is shever kli, which already became then broken on Yom Tif. That everybody agrees to. That would be considered to be a problem of noilad. That indeed, once you had the kli that was complete before Yom Tif, and only on Yom Tif it broke, so now it's considered to be a new type of kli. It's a shever kli. It's not what it was before when the entering of Yom Tif, whereby everybody in the holds the shita Rabbi Yehuda. Everybody here in our Mishnah means Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, that you cannot light, you cannot then use this for your fire, the shivrei kelim. And also the kuli ama islay the ula. Everybody also holds like ula. The omar ula hamalik tzar sheyalik b'roiv hayotze. That ula says that when a person lights the ner shel Shabbos or shel Yom Tif, so then it has to be lit. That's going to be roiv of the psil, so that when you leave your hand, then it will go up on its own. So it shouldn't go out. So once we establish these three facts, these three hanochos. Number one, that we're talking about a situation when the beged is gimel al gimel etzbos. Number two, we're talking about a situation when it's a shever kli, and a shever kli is noilad, cannot be used to be lit on, a shever kli cannot be used to make your fire on Yom Tif. And number three, when you light the ner shel Shabbos, then you have to light roiv, so that when you remove your hand, then it will go up on its own. So given these three hanachas, these three assumptions, says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva sovar kipul eino moyel. He says that when you then made it into a psil, it doesn't take away from its being a kli, and therefore it's still mekabel tuma. The kivan da adlik bei purta havile shever kli. And therefore, when you start lighting it, then it becomes a shever kli. It no longer has the status of the gimel al gimel, because it's now slightly less than that shiur. So it loses status of a kli. And therefore, when he goes and lights what has to be the roiv of this psil, of this wick, then he's now lighting a shever kli, which is also to be done on Yantiv because it's noilad. So therefore, that's why Rabbi Eliezer is the opinion that ein malikim bo, you cannot light with this beged. Rabbi Akiva savar kipel moil ve'ein taras kli alov v'chi kemadlik be'etz ba'alma kemadlik. Whereas Rabbi Akiva holds that when he did make it into a psil, then it lost its status as a kli before Yom Tif, whereby when he does go ahead and light it, he's lighting an eitz ba'alma. There's nothing wrong with it. And therefore, malikim boy. So that's the machlokis between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. Again, Rabbi Eliezer holds that you cannot go ahead and light this gimel al gimel, because then you'll cause it to be a shever kli. It'll probably on nolad. So then when you go ahead and light roiv, you'll be over an isser, therefore ein malikim boy. Rabbi Akiva says there was never a kli to begin with, because on Erev Yantif, right, it already lost its status as a kli. So then when you go ahead and light it on Erev Shabbos, which is Yantif, you can go ahead and do so. Rav Yosef, Hainu de Tanino Sholosh al Sholosh Mitzum Tzomos V'lo Yadan L'may Hilchasa. Until now, when I learned in a brisa that says this is Gimel al Gimel Mitzum Tzomos, exactly Gimel al Gimel Etzbos, I didn't know what it was referring to, which halacha. Now I understand it's referring to the halacha that we're talking about in our Mishnah, that the Psilas HaBeged that we're referring to has to be Davka, specifically Gimel al Gimel Etzbos. Now the Gemara asks, Umid the commentaries of Ada bar Ava libud Rabbi Yehuda, Shma'aminak Rabbi Yehuda Sfirulei. From the fact that Rabbi Ada bar Ava just used all of this explanation based on the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, by saying that both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva ascribe to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that Shivrei Kelim is Noilad, it must be that Rav Ada bar Ava also holds that. To which the Gemara asks, but he himself seems to hold differently. Umi Amar Rav Ada bar Ava Hochi, does he really say this? V'ha'amar Rav Ada bar Ahava, Nochri shechokak kav bebakas, a Gentile who engraves out a measurement of a kav in a piece of wood. Yisrael Masika, which belongs to a Jew. Yisrael Masika beyond a Jew can then go ahead, and Yisrael can make it a fire from that wood on Yontif. Ask the Gemara, Vamai, why should that be? Noiladhu, it's Noilad. So according to Rabbi Ada Ba'ava, he doesn't have a problem with it. And yet we see that it's Noilad. So it seems to be a contradiction within himself. Does he ascribe to the opinion that a shever kli is Noilad or not? Answers the Gemara, L'divreihem, the Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva Ka'amalei. He was only speaking in order to explain the two shitas of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, who hold that indeed, like Rabbi Yehuda, that it's noilad, but he himself doesn't ascribe to that opinion. He holds like the other Manda Amar, Rabbi Shimon, that it's not considered to be a problem of noilad. Now the Gemara brings another mahalich to explain what did it mean in the Mishnah that they're arguing in regards to the lighting of this psilas habeget shekiplo. Rava Omar, Hainu Taimod Rabbi Eliezer, Lefi she'en malikin bepsila she'ena mechuchreches, v'lo mismartutin she'enan mechuchrachin. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer says the reason why you cannot light is because we're talking about not a situation where on Erev Shabbos was Yantif. We're talking about every day, every week on Erev Shabbos, a regular Erev Shabbos. But the reason why Rabbi Eliezer says you cannot light the psila over here is because it wasn't then singed beforehand, whereby it won't then, when you light it, make a good light. And therefore, he says not to light it. Ein malikim boy. A whole different reason than what we said before. So it would come out that there's two different reasons so far, what we have over here in our Mishnah, as why Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva are arguing by lighting the psil on Erev Shabbos. Either according to the first opinion, the first suggestion is that Rav Ada bar Ava brought that we're talking about gimel al gimel etzbos, that's the beged, that's the cloth, whereby when he begins to light it, according to Rabbi Eliezer, since it's still a kli, thereby he will then cause it to be less than the shear, and it loses status as the kli shalem. It's now a shever kli. So then when he continues to light it, then he's going to then be over an iser of noilad, where it's muktzah. So therefore, ein malikim boy. Rabbi Kiva says it never had the status of a kli, and therefore he could light it. The second opinion, which is Rava's explanation, has nothing to do with that at all. We're talking about a regular Erev Shabbos, but the reason why he cannot light this psil is because it wasn't singed before Shabbos, and therefore beforehand, and therefore when he lights it, it won't be considered to be a hadlaka that is yafa. Says the Gemara, Elohad Tani Rav Yosef, Gimal mitzumatzamos l'may hilchasa. That which we quoted before, the Rav Yosef said that there's a brisa that says Gimel al Gimel etzbos exactly mitzumtzamos. So what is that now referring to according to the opinion of Rava? We had to explain how it was according to Rabbi Ada bar Ava, because that fits very well. That's specifically in Okimta, that the beged that we're referring to is Dafka Gimel Gimel etzbos. But according to Rava, what is the teaching of Gimel Mitzumtzamos? Gimel Mitzumtzamos. Says the Gemara, Le'inyan Tuma, it's referring to the matter of Tuma. Disnan, it says in the Mishnah, Shalosh al Shalosh, Sha'amru Chutz min Hamalal, Divrei Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says that when a person has a beged that is Gimel etzbos, it has to be with, in addition to the hem that's going to be then made, in order to then mekabel tuma. V'chachamim oimim sholosh al sholosh mechuvanos. Whereas Chachamim said, no, it can be including the hem. It can be also sholosh al sholosh, whereby it'll also be a little bit less, because the hem has to use some of that beged. Whereby that's what he meant before in that brisa when it says sholosh al sholosh mitzumtzamos, specifically in regards to then being mekabel tuma, when you have a beged, even though it's going to be used a little bit of that beged with the hem, it'll be technically less than Gimal Gimel, that also Gimal Gimel mitzumtzamos will be also mekabel tuma.